Hello, lovely ladies. Welcome to the Lessons I Learned podcast, where I share what I've learned and am still learning about marriage, mothering, friendship, health and wellness, spiritual growth, and everything in between. I'll be learning right along with you, as many of my guests have such great things to say. So get ready to listen, grow, be open and teachable, and get ready to learn and have fun doing it. Today's podcast will sound a little different because the person I'm interviewing has a much deeper voice than most others this season. Funny man Steve Geyer is a comedian we toured with back in the day, but he's not just witty, he's wise, and he's got some important things to share today. So tune in. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for joining me. Ladies who are listening, and maybe some gentlemen, today my guest is Mr. Steve Geyer, and I'm so excited to have him on today. I'm going to have him tell you a bit about himself in a minute, but before I give it over to Steve, first of all, hey, Steve, how's it going?
I'm good, Danielle. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad we had a little bit of a time trying to connect on this. We're doing it through Zoom today, this podcast, but we're here now and I'm excited. I know we're going to have an awesome conversation, but just for the listeners out there, I'll set up who Steve is to us. So Steve, to us, we met you, Steve, man, it must be almost 7 years ago now because we've been living in the Buffalo area about 7 years ago. And Steve is a comedian. Now he's much more than that, and you'll hear more. But part of what he does is he's a very funny man. He was put on a tour with us years ago. Dan, my husband, was doing the music. I was kind of the road manager at the time, and Steve was doing his comedy. I think it was a Valentine's tour. Was it? Or was it Christmas? I can't even think back.
I think the first tour we did was the Couples Night Out tour.
So probably February, yeah. And okay, so I'll tell the listeners, let's just say, at first I wasn't 100%, I wasn't so sure about you, Steve, but by the end of the tour, everybody listen, he had me in a hotel lobby, like pouring my guts out to him, and you were counseling me through some situations, and oh Lord. Thank you, Lord, for your grace and your you just we connected that night for sure, and we've come to love you, both my husband and I, and not just you, but your ministry, because we've seen over the last many years how you're not just a comedian, but you are a pastor. You are a minister to marriages, to people all over. And so I'm just going to give you the floor before we dive into what I really want to talk about, and just tell the listeners who you are, what you're about, what your mission is, and we'll go from there.
Well, sure. Yeah, it's funny. I remember that night really well because and I think part of the reason that we've become so close over the years is that you're kind of the prototype of what the book I wrote is about. It's someone who is loving and caring and just wants to do what they believe God has called them to do. And then you have people who are in the church that use their authority or their position or just their own opinions to shame other people. And you guys were just absolutely beaten up. And I think particularly you, because I think you saw, Dan was under attack, but you were really under attack because not only were you watching Dan be attacked, but it was these Christian people, and so where do you put that? So, so you, your mistrust for anybody in ministry was, there's a reason for that. That's called experience. But it was really neat. And it's just fun how, God will use somebody that you don't think, first of all, that you can get anything from, and then you don't even like them. And then the next thing you know, it's like, wow, God, thank you for, showing me that not everybody not everybody's going to hurt me, you know? And so,
Yeah.
so I actually I remember the hotel we were in. In fact,
Yeah.
I was recently in there, and I looked around, I sat down, I said, oh my gosh, I was in this hotel. But, yeah. And so, you know, shame's one of those things too, that a lot of people, in fact, when I wrote the book, it was never intended to be a book. It was a blog. I was working on a blog, and I was writing. I'd been blogging for a few months, and the editor called me and said, "Hey, you know, you're at your, you know, the deadline is coming up. You know, do you have it?" And I said, "Well, I'm having a hard time finishing it." And she said, "Well, how many words are you short?" And it was a 500-word blog, and I said, "Well, I'm not short. I'm short. I'm over." And she said, "Well, how many words are you over?" And I said, 20,000.
Been there.
Yeah, right. So she said, "Oh my gosh!" And she said, "Send it to me." And I said, "Well, I don't know." So I sent it to her, and a day or so later, she responded back to me. She said, "I've been in tears reading this." She goes, "This isn't a blog; it's a book. You need to write it."
Yeah. And
Like,
so before you continue, just so the listeners know, the book is called Shameless. And that's really why I have you on here, is because I read your book, Steve, and it is just so powerful and so needed. And so I just wanted to throw that out there before we dive in, that just so all the listeners can jot that down. The title is Shameless. Yeah.
yeah, it's shameless, and the subtitle is called "Set Free from the Mask" because, you know, I used comedy as a cover up for, you know, the pain that I was in as a kid and as an adult and as a young husband and then as a father. So it shame stayed with me for many years.
Mm.
But anyway, she encouraged me to keep writing, and I kept writing. And then I was like, I don't know. And then she said, "My husband's going to send you an email." And I'd never met either one of them face to face. And this guy sends me an email and says, "Hey man, you know, my wife's been working on your book, and you know, she sits there and cries." I said, "Oh my." And he said, "I've never seen her do this before." And because she's an editor for a living. And she even told me, she said she forgot that she was working because she would get so engrossed in it that she said it was just really for her. And he said, "But I want to thank you for something that has been a problem in our marriage for 11 years. I've always been sarcastic toward her. And I would just tell her I was joking. And in your book, you explain in real simple, but in great detail, um, what sarcasm does to a person, especially someone you love, like a spouse or a child." And he said, I stayed up all night. I repented to her and everything. And he said, "Keep writing your book." And so it was kind of weird because, again, like you never thought about writing a book, and yet, you know, you've got one, right? You
Yeah.
know,
And I mean,
right?
the best books come out of sometimes the hardest stories. And
Absolutely. And
yeah.
it comes out of a place of where you feel like you got healthy, or you became a better version of what God intended us to be. And it's like, and like you know, I have no desire to become famous or anything, or to become rich over a book. But if it can help people, and again, it's a blog.
Mhm.
And so anyway, fast forward, it took me quite a while to finish it. And just as we were getting ready to release it, I said no. And I had several different editors read it. I had mostly women edit it. And then I had one guy do it. So I thought, man, I wonder if this is going to appeal to guys. And he read it and was like, man, yeah, he said it really got him. And
Everybody. Yeah.
um, so what happened is a year before it came out, I actually rewrote it. I went back and tried to rewrite it again because it was so vulnerable, and I was just really naked. And I was like, "Am I sure I want to do this?" And so,
Mhm.
and the main thing about writing a book about shame is, if you've been shamed, how to talk about it without shaming someone else,
Yeah.
especially the people that caused you shame. So,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
a
yeah,
tricky thing for sure. Yeah.
yeah, it is very much so.
So what, like prompted or inspired you to want to bury yourself like this and go, okay, I've been a comedian for a lot of years. People know me as a funny guy. And now here I am. I want to release, my deep, dark secrets, or, whatever all this stuff is. Where did it come from for you to say, I want to tell people what the Lord's doing in me? And even farther back, like how did you learn this so clearly about yourself? Like, what was the process there?
Well, I guess the research, I didn't even realize I was doing research, but started when in the late 90s, I took a hiatus from touring and doing stand up to go on staff at the church I was attending in Nashville, Tennessee. It was Belmont Church. It was a very large church, and I went on staff I had been volunteering in the youth ministry, and we were kind of snake bit with youth pastors. We just couldn't seem to keep one, and youth pastors are a bit of an enigma. They come out of Bible college and they mean well, but they know everything. But the problem is they don't know anything, And so we were kind of snake bit, and so I had been volunteering, and I prayed and I said, Lord, if you want me to do this, have them come to me, and be real careful when you do that with the Lord, because within a few days, the senior pastor called me out of the clear blue and said, hey, I've been praying. This is a church of a few thousand people. He said, I've been praying, and I think you're supposed to be the new senior high youth pastor. And I was like dumbfounded. And I said, yeah, I think you're right. So I took a hiatus and was there for 5 years. And then the last church I was on staff at here in Atlanta, just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, was there for 10. And in my office would come people who wanted pastoral counseling. It would be married couples. It would be, young adults and students. And they all had this theme. And when they would talk about it, it was like, wow, I know how you feel. I understand that. And so I could empathize with them. And so I started putting words to how they were feeling. And they were like, oh my gosh, how did you know that? And I said, because I struggle with it too. It's called shame. Mm. So then I started studying shame and how it started and how it showed up in the creation story. Adam and Eve sinned and they both covered up because they were shamed. And then I found an interesting little tidbit of information is there was no such thing as good shame. Shame in itself is not good. In fact, it's like saying, well, there's some good kinds of cancer.
Right.
And you'll never find in the scriptures a good shame. And it is, it's God's love for us that leads us to repentance. It's that place where we acknowledge and we come to this understanding that, wow, I have messed up, but I am loved and I have a purpose. Shame says you don't deserve anything. And that's why a lot of people have a hard time accepting grace by faith. They think they've got to work. They feel like there's these scales that if I do more good things than bad things in my life, I can go to heaven.
Yeah. And I remember hearing before that shame isn't the guilt of doing something wrong. It's the feeling of like being something wrong. Like I am wrong.
Yeah, I am wrong. Yeah. In fact, one of the reasons one of the things I realized was, when people describe themselves or feel like they're worthless or unacceptable, that is a clear indicator that shame is a battle for them. It's like some people who would walk at, like, say, someone's at a dinner party, and the moment they leave, the first thing they do is criticize everything they did. Oh, why did I say that? Oh, you're so stupid. And that is a real clear indicator that shame has got a voice in your life. Or if, as soon as somebody does something that is, they make a minor mistake that a pencil eraser will fix, they go, oh, I'm so stupid. It's like, no, you're not. You made a mistake. That's why you have an eraser on the other end of that pencil. So what happens is people start to beat themselves up. And then, it was kind of like you guys. You guys were so cruelly treated in some degree that you almost wonder, well, am I really flawed? Is there something really wrong with me? Is it me? And you get there and then, you're drowning. And then, it's almost like you can't breathe. And so what I did was I started listening to people and I started putting words to how they were feeling, and I would share my own story and everything. And they're like, wow, this is like, I just feel like a weight was lifted off of me. And so I just would jot notes down to myself. And then, I started writing this. I started the blog in 2013. And what was so funny is back then there was nothing on shame, nothing. And since then a show came out called Shameless. There were other books that were written on shame. And I thought, this is fascinating how God must really want to deal with this, because I started working on mine in like the end of 2012, 2013, and my book didn't come out until 2016.
Yep.
So,
I'm right there with you with my book too. I was having the same issue. Like, Lord, I can see this rise. I know, in as far as shame goes, like Brene Brown, you must have been so frustrated seeing all of these shame books out. But I mean, your story in particular, and reading it, especially you vocalizing it as a male, because I think women are more prone. It's easier for us to talk about our vulnerabilities and our insecurity and feeling weak and like we're nothing. But for you to speak that as a male is a huge thing. It's important. And like you said, it's not just women, it's men dealing with it. Um, so what, so you're kind of, vocalizing what shame is, but where does it come from? I mean, obviously, you tell your story a little bit, so share with the listeners, like where does this all of a sudden come from when people are struggling with it? Some people do and some people don't. So where could you say, in your life, in your story, where did it begin?
well, for me, it started when I was a little boy, and I would hear my mother say things, and she would say, you know, uh, I've had 7 years of nothing but hell,
Mm,
and or I haven't been happy in 9 years. And what happened is that when she would say I've had 7 years of pure hell, I was seven. And when
wow.
she would say I haven't been happy since for 9 years, I was 9 years old.
Wow.
But what I equated that to was that's when my dad left. My father, they had, I was the youngest of three, and my father decided that he didn't want children, and he didn't love my mother anymore, and so he left. And so my mother was um, left to raise three children on her own. I mean, he didn't even pay child support. He never saw us, didn't really care to see us. So I would internalize these things. And it wasn't that my
Right.
mother was trying to shame me at all, but it was just her pain and her shame is real. Shame is very, very sticky, and it's a contact sport. And
Hmm.
her shame of being rejected by her husband and abandoned was put on me. And so um, mom started drinking out of a bottle until it started to drink out of her. She became an alcoholic. And so I internalized all these things. And then when I was a kid, to try to deflect things, and I would use humor as a way to survive, I would blurt out things. I would say things that I didn't think about. And so my nickname came from somebody I dearly love. And my nickname was Dumb Steve. Hey, Dumb Steve. Hey, Dumb Steve. And so everything was Dumb Steve, Dumb Steve. So now I believe that I am responsible for my mother's unhappiness. I'm responsible for my mother's hell. I'm dumb. I'm stupid. And when I first started to um, kind of breathe, where I could um, feel like I didn't hate myself. My mother, was a single parent home. She was a school teacher. School teachers didn't make a lot of money. And so, I never went to a dermatologist, so I had real bad acne as a kid and everything, you name it, couldn't afford braces and all that. So I had a real horrible self-image. And one day I was in remedial math, and I was a sophomore, 10th grade. And I was in there with all the athletes, right? All the guys that played football and basketball. And I finished my test, and I walked up and I laid it on the teacher's desk, and I went back and sat down, and I started scanning the room. I just started looking around like, wow, you guys are still taking the test.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget this lady's name, Danielle. Her name was Mrs. Van Hoydunk. Say that 10 times real fast. Mrs. Van Hoydunk. So she said, Stephen, would you come to my desk, please? And I said, yes, ma'am. So I walked up there, and she said, what are you doing in my class? And I panicked. My first thought was, people with shame have a default mechanism. If somebody were to say, hey, Danielle, I need to talk to you,
Hmm.
my first reaction would be, what did I do wrong? Instead of saying, hey, Steve, I need to talk to you, immediately I think, I did something wrong. What
Right.
did I do? And I go into full scale panic, and I start just spiraling down. So she said, what are you doing in my classroom? And I immediately felt that panic. And I said, I wasn't cheating, I promise, because I thought she saw me looking around like I was looking for answers. And I said, my paper's on your desk. And she said, I know it. I'm holding it in my hand. And she said, no, why are you in remedial math? And I said, because I'm stupid. And her eyes watered up. And she said, "What did you say?" And I said, "Because I'm stupid." And I'm telling you, this teacher, God love her. She went, "You are not stupid." She goes, "You got every one of these right. You even got the bonus question right." She goes, "Why aren't you in algebra 2?" And I said, "Well, I can't learn how to do algebra." And then she asked me this question, and I'll never forget it. "Can you not learn algebra, or were you never taught algebra?"
Wow.
And I went reeling back to the year before, where I had a junior high school teacher who had favorites and targets. And unfortunately, I was one of the targets because I was a little bit of a class clown. And she hated me. And I, I reciprocated. And, but what happened is that I had her in the last period of the day. And so she would just let one of her smarter students just kind of quote unquote teach the class. But they didn't really teach. They just put the equations up on an overhead, and then you had to try to fend for yourself. And I needed to be taught. She said, can you not learn, or have you not been taught? And I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, here." And so she did an equation. She said, "Do you see what I did here?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She was, "Now here." She wrote another one. She was, "Now you do it." And meanwhile, all the athletes are kind of watching this, like I've become the show, And so I did the equation, and I'll never forget this. I mean, I'm telling you this story, I see the classroom. I know what I was wearing. I mean, it was so impactful. She leapt up from her chair and she grabbed me around the neck and she goes, "See, you're not stupid. You're brilliant. You're so smart." And she started speaking all of these words of life over me. And I broke down like boo-hoo. And you don't do that in the 10th grade. You don't cry in front of your friends. And so she moved me. Within a week, I was in algebra 2. And, and I'll never forget that. And so when I started writing Shameless, I know where the shame came from. I know where it came, and it compounded, and how, but yet I still fought with the voices. And what I discovered was that there was only one Mrs. Van Hooydonk, but there were a lot of the other teacher. I don't want to say her name because it's not fair to her, but
Yeah.
the other teacher, I had a lot of her in my life. I had a lot of people saying cruel and negative things, and sometimes they meant it to be humorous, or they said it in a way that they were just they were venting their own issues. And so what I discovered was that you need 10 times as many Mrs. Van Hooydonks in your life, people who speak the truth, because it's really easy for us to believe a lie about ourselves.
Right.
It's very difficult to believe the truth.
Before we continue, if you're liking what you're hearing and you want more, head over to patreon.com/Macaulays to support our ministry and keep us going. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Okay, so you had some people speak shame into your life, but obviously there had to be somebody to speak life. And so, for my listeners here, what can we learn? So and actually, I have to just break here and say, give you some credit, because not only for this podcast, but for the blog, the entire theme of what I do is called Lessons I Learned. And every podcast I'm asking, what can we learn from you? But really, Steve, that actually came out of a conversation I had with you when we were talking about writing our books. And you gave me such a nugget of wisdom. You told me, as far as writing goes, you said, "Danielle, don't tell your readers what you know. Tell them what you're learning." Mm-hmm. And I've always remembered that. And it actually kind of morphed into all of this, is that we're all a work in progress. And I think the listeners out there, so many of them might be thinking, "Oh man, like I've said things that I didn't mean, that I didn't think would take hold with my kids or my spouse. I've thought that, that rant I went on, it could just be smoothed over with an ice cream or something." You know what I mean? And they're going, "Oh man, what do I do?" So maybe you can share with us, like, what can we learn from your story and what you've had to go through from a boy and struggling into now sharing how we can be people that either speak, like, there's so much power in our words. We either can speak life, or we can speak death and defeat into people that even just unconsciously, subconsciously can hang over our heads for our entire life, unless we truly have someone rooting for us, fighting for us, or if we have the Lord in our life to speak the truth about us. What can we learn listening and hearing your story to make things better for our families and for our kids that are going to grow up, and we want them to not struggle in life. We want them to not believe they aren't good enough. We want them to live to the best potential that they have in Christ. So share with us what we can learn about shame.
Well, I think fundamentally it goes to first having an understanding of who God is and what he says, but in his love for us, and that we're fearfully and wonderfully made and all those things. But one of the things that I've tried to model in my life with my wife and my kids and two grandbabies is that God's love gets us into heaven. Our love for each other is what gets us through life.
Oh, that's so good.
Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another." And if you read Ephesians 4, it says, Paul says, as a prisoner, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. And what he says next isn't tithe or go to church or to, volunteer. It says to be completely humble, be gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. And so what happens in the church, especially, is we kind of measure our spiritual maturity by how many mission trips we go on, or how much we volunteer, or our church attendance, or how many scriptures we have memorized. And heaven measures spiritual maturity by the way we treat each other.
Yeah.
So what I've learned is that God's love is enough to get me into heaven, but it's his love for me expressed toward others that helps them get through life. And so when we start loving each other, and this is I'm writing about that in my new book, is that, you can tell me all day long that God loves me, but if you can't show me what love looks like, how am I going to get it?
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. I mean, it's a perfect analogy of how we try to cover up shame is, blow up and then here, let me make you a batch of cookies. And what we learn to do is, it's funny. I don't know if you remember, you and I saw each other, and I think you were still stinging a little bit from how you used to view me, and you came up and you started to apologize all over again. And I remember saying, Danielle, when I see you, all I see is the girl that I love. You don't need to apologize to me. I know you didn't like me at first, but that's okay. And it was shame that kept, every time you saw me, it was like, oh, I messed up. And it was like, no, baby, I love you to death. I don't think about that. What I think about is who you are now. And we model that. We take that sting out. And so when we're the cause of so much, like if I had done something to hurt you, I would say, Danielle, did I do something? And you could say, yeah, you said this or this and this. And then I say, you know what? I am sorry for my carelessness. I did that. That was not my intent. Or if I blew up at you, I would own that and say, Danielle, I was having a bad day and I just blew up at you, and you didn't deserve that. You got in the way of a shotgun blast that I carelessly shot, and I am just terribly sorry. And could you forgive me? So what we do is we own it. We don't mask it. We don't cover it up. We own it, and we say, look, this is where I really messed up.
Yeah.
And we all make mistakes. Here's something that a mentor of mine told me one day, and this is so funny. We were together, and everything this man said was gold to me. And he looked at me one day, and he always calls me Stevie. And he looked and he goes, Stevie, you make a lot of mistakes, don't you? And Danielle, my heart just sank into my stomach. And that I adored says, you make a lot of mistakes, don't you? And I just, and then he smiled and said, you know why? He said, because you do a lot. He said, people who do a lot make a lot of mistakes. People who don't do anything, they don't make any mistakes. He said, you keep making mistakes.
Wow.
And it set me free. that
Mm.
when I made a mistake, I own it, right?
Yeah.
That when I do make a mistake, it doesn't define me. It's like you said, I don't want to tell you what I know. Let me tell you what I've been learning so we can learn together.
Hmm.
And that's what shame takes it off the person too, because if even if here's a silly one, but it works, and you've probably seen this before. Um, People would come up to me after a talk or something, and they would thank me. They would show genuine appreciation, and they would say, "Wow, that was whatever," and they'd be very, very kind in their appreciation toward me. And I would mistakenly think that humility was deflecting that, and I'd go, "Oh well, praise the Lord. Don't thank me, thank Jesus." And what I was doing was rebuking people for their kindness toward me. And it
Mm.
was setting myself up as this spiritual juggernaut, like, well, if you knew better, you would know to thank the Lord and not thank me. And here is someone walking up to me in a very vulnerable place saying, thank you, I appreciate you, whatever. And I rebuke them.
Mm.
And when the Lord showed that to me, I was gutted. I was like, oh Lord, I can't believe I would do that. And so I had to repent. And so now when people come up, because the shame made me walk in false humility. Having no shame, I can now accept encouragement. And when someone says, wow, that was really great, or, I've never laughed so hard, or man, what you said really helped. I say, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much you encouraged me with that. Thank you. And I
Mm.
receive it with gratitude, with humility, and say, thank you, thank you. Because if somebody comes up to affirm me and I rebuke them, wow, I just shamed them. My shame for not being able to receive a
Right.
encouragement just shamed them
You
right
passed
back.
it on. Right. Wow. So good. I mean, so I'm thinking here, as a listener to you, and sometimes I'm thinking as a mom myself, and some of the things that I've snapped at my kids and in a bad moment and all that, and I can feel like, ugh. And you've also mentioned in passing about we have to be careful, even as joking, it can get you can pass shame on even when you're joking. I can think so many times I've told my kids, like, don't just joke about another kid in your class or whatever and say, oh, I was just joking. Don't belittle them and mask it as a joke, because you're still shaming them. And I know you've talked about that before. So we have to be careful, but at the same time, we have to really, there can be healing from this. And so there's a lot of people walking around with burdens, with, this weight on their shoulder of shame from their past, from even as adults. Bosses can speak words of death into you. Anybody, or it can be the most, it can be a passing comment that just sticks with you depending on what you're dealing with. So if for the people out there who are listening and they're walking around ridden with shame and they know it, they're just resonating with the things that you've said, talking about your childhood and how you felt and how you viewed yourself. How can they begin the steps to being able to take that off of their shoulders? And maybe for yourself, you can tell us, like, what did you do to, you said it's not that you don't have shame. The reason you call your book Shameless is you just
Right.
have shame less.
That's right. It's
So
shame.
how did you get to that point?
Well, starting from fundamentally, I'm a spirit. I'm not a body. I'm not a personality. Fundamentally, I'm a spirit. So I had to start from that foundational place of speaking to my spirit the truth. And how do you do that? Well, through scripture. Scripture is spirit. And so my spirit could be transformed to be able to accept what I was saying. My spirit says, okay, I trust that God, you are the almighty authority, and and there's all this amazing stuff that's said about us as God's creation, and ultimately He wants us to be uh, in our choice to be considered His child in the family, allowing us to be adopted by Him per se.
Mhm.
And so I had to let my spirit come alive and let my spirit, the spirit man in me, start to transform, and then start to unmask the lies that I was dumb, Steve. Well, I wasn't dumb. I had to unmask the lie that I wasn't the reason for my mother's heartache. I wasn't the reason for my mother's troubles. I wasn't the reason she became an alcoholic. That
Mm-hmm.
was her choice and that was her reaction to being shamed. And so I had to stop owning everything. It wasn't mine to own. And sometimes if you have shame, what we do is we kind of have this, it's, um, it's like, it's like omnipotent accountability. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm responsible for everything.
Everything. Right.
Right, everything. So if something goes wrong, oh, it's my fault. Or if something goes bad, oh, it's because I snapped at one of my kids, or oh, it's because I didn't read my Bible enough. There's something, and it's this omnipotent accountability that wherever I go, it's my fault. Wherever I go, it's my responsibility, and I have to take the fall for it, and we have to move away from that. And then the other thing and it's really quite simple for me, was to be able to laugh. Here I am, a comic, and I couldn't laugh about my own foibles. I hated my foibles. I hated my mistakes. And when I could say, and like my mentor Don Finter said, Stevie, you make a lot of mistakes because you do a lot. And if you do a lot, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. That's how you learn, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to give ourselves permission to make mistakes, give ourselves permission to learn, give ourselves permission to get better, and to not continually hold over ourselves our past mistakes. Here's a real clear one, and for your listeners, if anybody has ever, like, just not really doing anything, dusting or working on something or driving or anything, and all of a sudden you make this sound, like this, just out of
Mm-hmm.
will you just make this exasperate sound, and people go, "Did you say something?" And you go, "Oh no, I didn't say anything." But there's this
You're
kind of volcano of shame coming up, and
right. You're mad at yourself. You're upset. Yeah,
exactly. It's
exactly.
like a pressure cooker, and that little psh, psh, psh thing that lets off a little bit of steam to keep the steam regulated. And it's like, ugh, or watch it, or say a word like that, and people say, "What'd you say?" "Oh, nothing." You're talking to yourself. That's the
Yeah.
clear indicator that you're wrestling with this spirit of shame.
Mm.
And what it is to go, okay, what is the truth? And there are things. It's, what does God say about me? What do I say about me? What do others say about me? What does the devil say about me? And
Mm.
oftentimes I agree more with the devil and with other people than I agree with what God says about me.
Right.
Remember, God whispers, but the world shouts.
Yeah.
The
Who's
world
going to be the louder voice? Yeah.
absolutely. And the reason I believe that, this is my own silly reason, but I think the reason it says that God whispers is so that when somebody's whispering, you have to get closer to them to hear them. And so when somebody's shouting, you can hear them far, far away and you can keep your distance. But when God whispers, it's like I got to lean in
Right.
and move myself closer to where he is. So it's like when he's whispering, it means, okay, moving closer.
Yeah.
And so I've just learned as I go too that, and I still battle it. I mean, I was telling somebody about this recently. Um, they said, well, how do you deal with shame now? Because you don't have it anymore. And I laughed and I said, sure I do. And they
Hmm.
said, what do you mean? I said, okay, when you walked up to me after I spoke, what is the first thing I asked you? And they went, I said, no, think about it. What did I ask you? And you said, oh, you said, did any of that make sense?
Hmm.
And I said, uh-huh. And they said, yeah, it was great. And I said, see, shame is insecurity says you screwed up, you messed up, you didn't do good, you should have said this. And I said, I'm raw. I'm as vulnerable as a kitten as soon as I finish speaking or doing something that I believe is of value to somebody. Because my first thought is, did I do it right? Was it okay? Did it make sense? I said, I'm not looking for a compliment. I said, that is me still operating out of, continually not feeling ashamed. And I said, and it's good to be introspective and to be self-assessing and go, yeah, did that make sense? But I said, for me, it's still an indicator that I'm still battling a little bit of shame, because my first thing was, hey man, did that make sense? Was that okay? And he
Mhm.
goes, wow, that's really interesting. And I said, so, and then the conversation, I said, well, which one's yours? And
Hmm.
then he shared with me what his indicator was.
Yeah.
So we all have these little indicators that let us know, okay, I'm still dealing with it a little bit, and I'll get better and better. I'll get more shameless as I grow.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we're all works in progress, and we're never going to reach perfection until the other side. So it's the important thing is the awareness. And I think
Right.
that's what you're doing with, with your book, is just spreading. Some people walk around their entire lives plagued with shame, and they don't even know what to call it. And so
Right.
when the fact that you're calling it out is making us aware. And that's with anything we deal with. Once we're able to own it and be honest about it, and our ears perk up to a little, and the Lord can work on us. And as you say, the important thing is letting God whisper daily. It's a daily thing, because we can just slip back into our weaknesses and what we're prone to. And so this conversation has been so good. And my ears have been listening, and my wheels have been turning in my head. And I think for everyone out there listening, obviously, let God whisper daily to you His word and what he says about you, but also go grab this book, Shameless, just because I read it, and I've never thought I was one that dealt with shame, but it made me think here and there. And then I also passed it on to a couple people who I knew would just devour it. And it is such a great, real, raw, truthful story, full of God's truth as well. And so thank you, Steve, for just being vulnerable and directing people to God's truth. It's funny. Before I go into where can we find you and all that, you mentioned your next book, and I know I've listened to some of the content from. I know what your next book is, and I totally want you to come back. And it's called. Is it called Who the Pooh Are You? Is that what it's going to be called?
Yeah, it's called Who the Pooh Are You?
Yeah, and all the listeners are going, "What the heck does that mean?" So maybe just give a short little synopsis for everyone about what's coming up next for you, and then I'll ask you, where everyone can find you.
Well, this actually started. When I was on staff at the churches I was at, I would take people on missions trips, and I would take middle schoolers on trips, and I love the personality profiles and how they work, but sometimes they're a little too complicated, or they kind of, it's they weren't fitting what I needed for these middle school kids. And so I started working using cartoon characters, and then using my own research and ways of explaining relationships to people. And I did this personality test so these middle schoolers could get along with each other. And then the high school kids, I graduated it up because high school kids wanted to do it. And then I made it a little bit more adult friendly because the young adults wanted to do it. And then I started using it in premarital counseling.
Yeah.
Then we started doing it on the couples night outs, were just kind of this little thing. And it was so helpful. And then all of a sudden I just started expanding it and doing more research. And I've had psychiatrists and psychologists and therapists and people who, PhDs come up and say, I've seen personality profiles before, but I've never seen one like this. This is, they said, this is like the way you explain relationships. I've never heard anybody do. Do you have a book? And I was like, no. And then our dear friend Eric Spath, who runs funandfaith.com, called me one day and he said, do you know what the number one book request is on the website? And I was like, well, the 5 love languages, because, he works with Dr. Chapman and Gary Thomas and others. And I said, well, the 5 love languages. And he goes, no. And I said, Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. He said, no. He goes, it's a book that doesn't even exist. He told me it was Who the Pooh. He said, it's the number one book request we get. So I started fiddling around with it and started doing more research. And what it is just, it's based on relationships. It's to how whether it helps anybody in business or not. What it's designed to do is to help people love each other, communicate in a way that lifts shame off of one another, and so that you can. And it's the book. The core of the book is God's love gets us into heaven. Our love for each other is what gets us through this life, and it's to help people love not only other people in their lives, but to love themselves. And
sorry, finish your thought there.
Oh no, just and be willing to take the challenge to say, hey, God wants to love other people in life through me. He told us, all men will know you're my disciples by the way you love each other. And that starts with your spouse.
Oh, I think this book is actually going to be for anyone who ever interacts with anyone else on Earth. So who the Pooh are you? We're not talking about the brown stuff. You're actually, you've used personality testing using the Winnie the Pooh characters.
Correct, yeah.
So that's what it is. You've got, Winnie the Pooh, and then what, Eeyore, Piglet.
It's a Piglet, Owl, Piglet, Owl, Tigger, and Rabbit.
Right. And so you help us all, and I've heard you speak on this. It's fascinating, actually. You help us all figure out who the Pooh are we, and who am I, and because they all have a different personality type, and there's one personality who's the leader, or the playful one, or the one who just wants everyone to get along, and it just helps us identify who we are, and then and who our spouse is, and even who our kids are, and all of that, and the people around us, and then be able to love and serve them well. And like you said, without shame. It's a brilliant, I can't wait for the book. So I want you to come back once that's out so we can chat about that more. But before we go, so where can everyone find you online? How can we grab Shameless? Your social media, give us the rundown.
My social media is there's a quote unquote fan page on
Oh, you got lots of fans, Steve. I know you do.
But they can go to funandfaith.com or funandfaith.ca and get information. They can also go to stevegeyer.com, and then my Instagram's a little goofy. It's the letter G and then the number 8.
Oh, because you're a fan of the Gators, right?
You're a Gator Buck fan. That's right. So Gator Buck fan. So it's GATORBUCFAN. So it's Gator Buck fan on Instagram. And then, they can go to, probably the easiest way is you go to funandfaith.com, because they have all of the, what's coming up and where we're going and all that. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I just know that the listeners, you've challenged them. I think when it comes to love, I mentioned this in another podcast, but it's important to think what it's like to be on the other side of me, to think about. So I think this challenges that thought, like when it comes to me, how am I treating others and speaking to others, but also, we have to take ownership for ourselves, but then also give grace. And it's just like a two-way street, and the Lord covers it all. He has grace for us all, and he has healing. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to want to pick up this book, and I think you're getting the wheels turning for people when it comes to this topic. So thank you so much for jumping on here for a little half hour, a little bit more than that or so. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. And always fun to hang out with you.
Yeah, a good excuse to chat. We'll do another podcast soon.
So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
If you're hiding behind the mask of shame, listen closely. Don't beat yourself up for your mistakes or for what others have done to you. Remember, there's an eraser on the end of God's pencil. And as your story is written, he is able to blot out the parts that should have never been said or done to you. And he will help you rewrite the shameful moments and become shameless. What Satan intended for evil, God always turns for good. He will make What Satan intended for evil, God always turns for good. He will make straight your crooked paths, erase the lies, and tell you the truth about yourself so that you can be free to speak life and God's truth to the ones around you. I hope you've been encouraged, challenged, and have learned something new today. It is my passion to help women become the best version of themselves with God's help. All the ministry we do, we feel deeply called to, and we live by faith doing it. Would you consider supporting our ministry at patreon.com patreon.com/Macaulays. That's patreon.com/MACAULAYS. You may see a link on your screen nearby if you're tuning in using YouTube, SoundCloud, or my website. But if not, that's where you can go to find us. We are grateful for every one of you who believe in us and champion our ministry. Lots and lots of love, Danielle.